Welcome everybody. Welcome to Mobycon's fourth webinar. Today the webinar is about changing hearts and minds. Not a very technical topic. There will be no discussing curb heights or drainage pipes or anything like that, but it's probably the more important part of project planning and the most overlooked part of project planning. How to make sure that people actually buy into your project and how to make sure that they agree with your vision and that that vision is the right vision to portray. So it is my pleasure to introduce Melissa Bruntlett. She is the International Communications Specialist here at Mobycon. I'm proud to call her my colleague for about a year now, where she moved from Vancouver in Canada to the Netherlands, basically to ride her bike, but she'll say that it's for work and that kind of thing. But it is a great pleasure to have her here working with us on making our projects more effective, making our communication more inspiring. And today she'll be taking you through this webinar. To start, I would like you to get your smartphone out or use a computer is fine as well, because we will be using Mentimeter again, which you're probably used to by now if you have followed our previous webinars. Today's Mentimeter code is 29795. So if you go to menti.com and type in code 29795, this code will be repeated later on, don't worry, you'll be able to participate in the interactive elements of this webinar. So without further ado, here is Melissa.
Hello, everyone. Thanks, Leonard, for the introduction. As you said, my name is Melissa Bruntlett, and I do the international communications here at Mobycon. For nearly a decade, I've been working in marketing promotion around urban mobility, using a variety of communication tools to help get the messages out around urban mobility projects, including through writing, photography, filmmaking, social media, as you're likely aware. And then about 2 years ago, I published a book with my husband, Chris, called Building the Cycling City, the Dutch Blueprint for Urban Vitality, to help communicate a lot of the lessons from the Dutch that can be applied elsewhere in the world. And we have a following book coming in spring of 2021, so keep an eye out for that. But for today, I'm going to be looking at what I've learned over the years and demonstrate how thinking a little more critically about the imagery that we're using when we're promoting cycling and urban mobility projects in general really helps to achieve the goal of safer streets. So a few of the objectives for today. First, I'm going to look into the why. So why is it that I'm here presenting this? Why is it important to think about the imagery we're using? I'm going to look at a few of the common barriers that people experience in terms of promoting projects, a lot of the backlash that they might face as a result of these barriers. And then I'm going to get into the how. I've got 8 simple rules for you to get you started on your own marketing plan. And then finally, I'll go briefly through some of the tools to get you started. Okay, so at this point, as Leonard said, we're going to be using Menti. So please enter the code now if you haven't already, because we have our first question coming up. Okay, so our first question, oh, you've already answered some, great. Our first question looks at bike-lash, and I want to get a sense of what some of the common arguments you face or you hear against proposed cycling plans. So whether that's the fact that people think no one cycles in your community, or that they don't follow the rules, or they think they own the road, that they're going to bike lanes will cause congestion or affect parking negatively, cyclists don't pay for the road, businesses often think that it might affect their business, or that they're a waste of taxpayer money. There's obviously many more arguments out there, but these are a lot of the common ones I've heard over the years. And what you'll see as the results start coming in is that you're all kind of experiencing a lot of the same challenges. Parking, of course, is one of the biggest ones that many people face, so it's not surprising that's showing up as number 1. But yeah, just I think what to gather from this really is that we're not alone. We're all facing a lot of the same challenges, and that's part of why I'm here today, is to help you understand how to market that, to try to overcome some of these arguments and get past them to start having constructive conversations. Also, I think Leonard might have mentioned it, but you'll see there's a little question box at the bottom of that screen. So if you have any questions as we go along, feel free to add them. We will have time at the end for you to submit some questions for us to answer later. Okay, we shall carry on then. So why am I here today, and why have I started the career that I have? It all sort of started in Vancouver when I started cycling a lot more for transportation. At the time, the city was doing a lot and investing a lot in terms of building out cycling infrastructure and making it safer for all ages and abilities. And so as a part of that, my family started really using that infrastructure and getting out there and being a lot more active. However, the way that cycling and those improvements and investments were represented in media were very negative or very sporty. It made cycling look like it was dangerous, inaccessible, and really meant more for recreation or for sport. And the changing demographics I was seeing on the street were not being represented in the media. And so myself with Chris set out to start changing that narrative and really start thinking about how the imagery we're presenting, whether it's for media, advocates, or city governments, is really important in helping to change the idea around what cycling can be for your city. And so today we're going to explore some of those images that we use to represent cycling and really help to, or what is important within that to help get your projects and proposals going forward. So first off, we'll look at a bit of the why. First and foremost, the way you market your project is to help build political capital. You're trying to build that public support for the project you're working on. And so in terms of the images that we're using, it's really important to help do that, whether it's on social media, accompanying an editorial, or envisioning a photography or video campaign. The right images can really help to build that capital and get the public, press, fellow politicians that might be unsure about your project, and the business community even on board with building safer streets and realizing your projects. So it helps to stir their imagination and helps them to understand that a vibrant city is more than just the two fast-moving lanes in front of their store or in front of their community and the parking alongside it. Second, we need to carefully consider the role that enticing images play in encouraging new people to cycling. Cities are spending a lot of political and actual capital to realize these bike infrastructure and urban mobility projects and policies. And so you need to be considering a marketing component within that. And even if it's just a small amount of your budget, it can prove to be really valuable on getting that return on investment for all that work that you're doing. And really the ideal scenario being that someone sees what you're putting out there, sees the images, and thinks, I can do that. Excuse the maybe controversial image, but really I think a lot of us can understand that what we're trying to do is build understanding and empathy, and you only need to delve into the comments section online or attend a public meeting to realize that a lot of us have organized ourselves by our modes of transportation. And that transportation tribalism is a really destructive mental barrier both on and off the streets, despite a lot of our cities really becoming more multimodal. So presenting a face and a story to that person on a bike or the person walking on the street really helps to hopefully shed a lot of those labels like cyclists that people have put on the various modes that we use. And if anything, it reminds people behind the wheel of a car or even a fellow cyclist the next time they encounter someone that that person could be a mother, a father, a child, or someone's grandmother. And finally, we really hope with the imagery that we're using that we're normalizing the act of utility or transportation cycling. For a lot of cities, we're still seeing cycling as a recreational pursuit or something that's more sporty and done for fun or for exercise. And they can't really imagine a world where you start to use a bike for transportation to go to the store, get kids to school. I know it's very commonplace here in the Netherlands, but I know in North America, with my experience and those of people that we've worked with, this is a common barrier that we're trying to overcome. So the imagery that we use to promote our projects should really strive to make cycling in regular clothes, hauling a bag of groceries, things like that, completely normal. Okay, so we have our next question. Common barriers. So I would like to hear from you what some of the biggest barriers are to winning public approval for your cycling projects. I'll give you some time to answer. There we go. I was a little concerned it wasn't working. So lack of knowledge. Right now I've only got a couple of responses, but of course that is going to be a big one in terms of communicating how things are going. Bike lanes as a political issue, definitely a problem. It's weird how the act of getting on a bike has become quite political in a lot of places, and it's unfortunate, but we really hope, as you'll see as we go through this, that we can start to move past that. But once again, you'll see, just as before, we're all kind of dealing with similar challenges. Some are bigger than others, but we're not alone and we can all learn from each other, and I think that's a really valuable thing to remember as we start to really bring cycling infrastructure and cycling projects to cities around the world. Okay. We're up to 62. I'm going to carry on, but you guys can keep answering. This is all great information for me. Okay, so we're going to get into a few of the barriers. And the first one that I want to talk about is this focus on the commute. There's a really damaging effect when municipalities shape their infrastructure, policy, and marketing strategies around that commute to work. And while I will gladly admit that it's really important to try to encourage people to leave the bike at home, leave the car at home and get on a bike to go to and from work, by focusing solely on that trip, we forget all the myriad other trips that people take in a day. And this is especially crucial when you think about these unpaid care trips that a lot of people make when it comes to running errands, doing groceries, picking up children. And a lot of times those trips are done by women. So when we're forgetting to show how your project will benefit those trips and those people, we're forgetting a large portion of the population. So we need to really start focusing on promoting those trips, and it becomes really easy in that case to start making people come up on board in terms of accepting the bike lane projects on things like high streets and the places where people are actually traveling to on bike. The next barrier is viewing streets as thoroughfares, and this is really a byproduct of decades of engineering our streets to allow for maximum throughput rather than as places to come and stay. But if you really start to examine the streetscape, there are countless businesses whose main goal is to get you to stop and spend money. And when you're behind the wheel of a car traveling at 50 kilometers an hour or 30 miles per hour, you're not seeing the businesses that you're passing by. And so we need to think about returning to a mindset of the street being a place for connection and community. And in that respect, they become destinations where people are spending money at local shops and markets, and that relationship starts to be built with the community, and that idea of having a well-knit group becomes a greater reality when you start to show that what you're doing can help to encourage that. And this also relates to this idea of a merchant perception gap. I'm sure a lot of you have faced over the years businesses and merchants that feel that by taking away those precious 2 parking spaces in front of their business, you're going to negatively affect them. And this study here that you can see is from Gary Boulevard in San Francisco, but I've seen similar stats from Vancouver and other major cities and even smaller cities where the merchants have an idea that over half their customers are arriving by car, when in fact the opposite is quite true, where 80%, at least in this case, are arriving by walking, cycling, or transit. And so if we start to find a way to communicate that really helps people understand how people are actually traveling, and that more often than not people choose to spend their money locally, then we can start to bring more people into supporting the projects we're working on. The next all too common barrier in a lot of burgeoning cities is the idea that the network be built on quiet neighborhood streets and using that as the promotion. But relegating bikes to the back street really only reinforces that idea that they're built for for commuting and for recreation and not for transportation. And results from countless cities around the world, and obviously the Netherlands, show that bikes can bring business. And so rather than focusing on the low-hanging fruit of these lovely greenways, which I won't disagree are not beautiful to cycle on, but rather showing how the network is well connected and bringing people to access streets and high streets, you can really start to change that mindset. And finally, far too often the conversation around increasing cycling really centers on people that are currently riding bikes. And the mantra really should be that we're not designing the streets for the 5% that are already cycling, but rather the 95% that would like to get onto their bikes but are unsure about doing it. And that latent demand for complete networks in our cities is really palpable, and you can experience it anytime you talk to someone who would really like to start cycling but is unsure. And so if we can show imagery and content that really shows how they would benefit from what you're proposing, you can start to change that narrative and help them understand that the infrastructure you're planning, the policies you're planning are not just for who's already cycling, but who's going to cycle in the future. Okay, we have our next question. And this is the part where we start to understand our audience. So I'd like to hear from you who your target audience is. I will say I'd like you to be honest. I know I talked about the focus on the commute earlier, but if that's who you're currently marketing for, then that's totally fine. But yeah, just give me a sense of who you think or who you know you're trying to reach with the proposals you're putting out. I'm getting some answers in. Interested but concerned is always a big one. And new cyclists, that's good to see. I'm happy to see a lot of families on here as well, because you can really win a lot over, not just with the parents that are cycling, but you're building a new generation of cyclists, which is really great. Awesome. Okay, we shall carry on. So next up, I'm going to get into my rules for bike marketing. This isn't exhaustive, but it's some of the common patterns that I've seen come up in terms of how to successfully reach people and how you're going to connect with your community from a positive standpoint. So, rule number 1 is to share the stories, not the statistics. And in a post-truth society that most of us seem to be living in now, especially digitally, people believe what they feel to be true rather than what facts and figures actually say to be true. And that fear and uncertainty and doubt that a lot of people experience for change is very, very normal. Bringing facts to a culture war is like bringing a spoon to a knife fight. It's really not effective. You're not going to win people over. So we need to learn to set aside the graphs, set aside the charts and statistics. Keep those for when you're trying to convince the politicians that what you're doing from a quantitative standpoint is very positive for the community. And connect with people on a more human level. Explain how they're going to benefit personally from the change that you're proposing. And it's really imperative within that we tell stories, craft narratives, and shape messages that appeal to people from an emotional level rather than just an intellectual one. The next rule, and I will agree this is a constant challenge for anybody working in marketing and communications, is to think outside of the echo chamber. Both in our personal and professional circles, online and in person, we're becoming increasingly self-reinforcing and self-congratulatory, and we like to surround ourselves, obviously, with like-minded people, but our algorithms even are feeding us the news and ideas that strengthen our worldview. And so we need to look at our marketing proposals and strategies as a way to stop preaching to the converted, but rather start thinking bigger and more creatively outside of those existing feedback loops as to how we're going to reach the people that we really want to encourage to join us in this in your journey forward. And it really helps to spread the message to a broader audience. It is a challenge for us to think differently, but there's a great opportunity there to see things from a new perspective and hopefully start to take some new considerations into mind yourself. Next is to promote the cycling culture you want, and I believe it's crucial that with the imagery you're using, it's aspirational. You want this communication strategy to be a marketing exercise, not a documenting one. And so you need to represent the types of people that you want to see cycling in your city and not just the ones that are currently there. Believe me, they're on board, you've got them, they've drank the Kool-Aid, as so to speak, and they're going to come along with you. Now you need to convince the people who are a little unsure or maybe have never cycled before that this will benefit them and this is where you're moving to. And so that includes using a variety of ages and abilities in your marketing materials, and consider that even the types of bikes they're using, the types of clothing they're wearing, really showing a diversity of what the options are for people. And this leads into rule number 4, which is to be the diversity that you want to see. And it's really important that not only are we showing people of a variety of ages, but also ethnicities and body types. And this brings back to an adage that I'm sure many people have heard of before, is this idea that if you can't see it, you can't be it. In the worlds of cycling, transportation, and urbanism, it's still, unfortunately, very pale, stale, and male, despite the fact that that is changing, I will admit. However, we want to make sure that we're being considerate of the groups that we're trying to reach. We should share the stories of the often ignored people for whom cycling is an interest they would like to try, but maybe they haven't yet. And it reinforces this idea that you're building these safer streets to level the playing field for all users, regardless of influence or income. And next, building upon that, is the idea that we're building a lifestyle, or marketing a lifestyle, not a product. And it's really something that the automobile industry has been doing quite successfully for nearly a century now. They're selling this idea that the car is going to bring joy, freedom, mobility, but often by stretching the truth a little bit, I think we can all attest that those wonderful commercials of vast empty streets are not really accurate to our lived experience. And so what we need to do is actually take a page from their playbook, use those same strategies, although you could really argue that showing the joy and freedom of cycling is probably a little more truthful. And so that means telling compelling human stories where the bicycle is playing a supporting role rather than a main role. And so next up, I'm going to show you a video of an example of kind of what I'm talking about. It is a commercial ad, not a marketing campaign for a cycling project, but I think it kind of encapsulates the idea of cycling for a lifestyle or marketing for a lifestyle and for a different demographic.
Oh my, oh, you're so far, loving you still wherever you are. Oh my, oh, I need you here. Life is just better with you beside me. Ooh, what do I do without
Okay, so rule number 6. Actually, before we get into that, I think that ad is fantastic. I think when I first watched it, I thought it was a commercial for male enhancement drugs. So it goes to show you that it was very effective in getting me to stay engaged, and I think that's something that we need to keep in mind when we're thinking about marketing for sure. Not the male enhancement drugs, but you know what I mean. Anyway, so rule number 6 is to make it look safe, simple, and sexy. Some of the biggest mental barriers around urban cycling is that it's dangerous, it's complicated, I'm going to get sweaty when I do it. So we need to carefully consider whether the photo we're planning on including with a tweet, a story, or in your campaign helps to reinforce these misconceptions or dispel them. And while infrastructure is really important in getting that interested and concerned onto basically bringing them in and having them welcome your proposed change, they might need a little coercion still. And so once again, you use imagery that may not exactly represent the conditions right now, but again, remember this is marketing. Rule number 7 is to celebrate the success stories. The media, as we know, loves a good conflict, and with proposed cycling plans and infrastructure, there will unquestionably be focus on the controversy of your proposed plan. And we so seldom see the good news stories of new users or businesses that are benefiting from these controversial decisions. And so the marketing strategy you propose needs to provide a counter narrative that really reinforces this triple bottom line of the social, environment, financial benefits of bike lanes, or any mobility project really. And these are a lot more convincing when they're presented in an accessible way and with an emotional key to them, rather than using facts and figures. And finally, rule number 8, show, don't tell. Allow me to stress that nobody likes to be preached to, and part of the hate that a lot of us feel towards cyclists, quote unquote, is this guilt that people feel because they're not riding bikes themselves. We're not going to guilt them into accepting or even championing our projects, nor are we going to convince them with words alone. And so if we show them that there is a more enjoyable, more efficient option that might exist, they might just be willing to join us on the ride. And I have one more video to show you. It's a project that I worked on with Chris from Audacity back in Vancouver and our colleagues there for the advocacy group Hub Cycling there for their Bike to Shop days.
In 2015, the Downtown Vancouver Business Improvement Association led an engagement process to get to the heart of what Vancouverites want downtown to look like by the year 2040. They told us, build on the early success of our bike infrastructure. In the 3 years since we set out on this discovery, we've seen amazing growth and support for cycling in our city. We couldn't be happier to support sustainable organizations like Hub Cycling. As Hub says, more people cycling means healthier, happier, more connected communities. We couldn't agree more. We want to build a vibrant, sustainable downtown for future generations to enjoy. So get on your bike, head to the shops, pedal to the waterfront, and grab a delicious donut and enjoy everything that downtown Vancouver has to offer. Cyclists are welcome downtown.
I love that video, not the least of which because my daughter and her friends are in it, so it's a nice little time capsule of our time with her friends and our community back in Vancouver, so I hope you liked it. Okay, we're getting to the end here. So you've seen the rules, you've seen the barriers and the why we're doing this. I put together a few little steps that you can consider when you're creating your communication strategy. Again, this is not exhaustive, but it's a way to at least get you started, and then if you have questions, you know where to go. So first and foremost, you need to understand your audience, which is why I asked you about your target audience earlier on in the Menti. So understand who it is that you're marketing to, but also how they consume media, because how you reach one demographic is going to vary greatly from how you reach another. And so understanding that is really important in terms of moving a project forward and moving your communications plan forward. You also need to have clear goals, understand what it is you're trying to achieve. Are you trying to get votes, or are you trying to get people to understand what you're working on? And then you need to have a measurement, way to measure how you're going to see whether you were successful in that or not. Understand that you have multiple approaches, so there's a variety of mediums out there. Make use of all of the available channels to get your message out. Again, that will help you to reach all these different demographics within your target audience. And create a clear message. And that means that make sure that no matter which medium you're using, that your message is clear. And what's helpful with that is to have a media guide for your team, whether it's the project team or your communications team at the municipal level, so that they know how to answer questions that people might have, how to deal with backlash, and how to respond. And that'll help to make sure that throughout your campaign, the message is consistent. And to help with that also is to create a content planner, have a schedule. Oftentimes what we find with communication strategies is people will put a message out at the beginning of a campaign and then leave a vacuum that can be filled with potential bike-lash and negative feedback. So if you have a planner that says, okay, from day one we're going to do this, and have a consistent campaign as you go forward, then you can make sure your message stays clear, stays out there, and people know what's going on. And then finally, have a budget. All too often, marketing is forgotten about when it comes to cycling projects, and so there's no money left over to really reach the people that you're trying to reach. And so make sure to remember, nothing good is free, and budgeting for things like print and digital media can really help you to have a good campaign and get some people on board with you. And finally, don't forget all your tools. We all have websites nowadays. Make sure your messaging is on there and that it's easy to find and clear. Use social media, whatever channels you might use. These are the ones I commonly use. I know there are a whole plethora out there. My children will tell me there's another one out there called TikTok that I'm not willing to explore. But if you want to, by all means. Make use of print media though. It is a really great way of trying to reach your community, especially if you're in a smaller community where they might not be as connected digitally, but you will be able to reach them with not just things like newspaper, but postcard campaigns. If you have a community newsletter, sending it out via print is really handy. But then also make use of the digital options. Use online newsletters, your mailing lists to reach people that way. Don't forget about quality photography and video. iPhone shots are great, but if you really want to make an impact, invest. There's a lot of artists right now that are probably in your community looking for work, photographers and videographers. Feel free to engage them. They can be valuable not just in terms of getting quality work, but you can get some local investment, and they probably have some pride in your community already and will be able to photograph that in a really great way. And within that, also don't forget about your cycling advocates and your local influencers. They're going to get your message beyond your network into their own network. So bring them on board, ask them to share things out, and you might find you'll get even greater success in what you're working on. And finally, you're all here watching me in a webinar. This is a great tool for communicating with people, especially nowadays while we're working quite digitally. Make use of it, even half an hour, 15 minutes, communicating with your community about what it is you're working on can go a long way to getting your message out. So that's the end of my presentation for now. We're going to take a really quick break and just reset the stage here a little bit. In the meantime, you have an opportunity to ask some more questions, and we'll come back and Leonard and I will address them.
Welcome back, everyone. We've transformed the studio back to our Q&A interview setting, and we have 18 questions from the audience. I also thought of a couple of questions, so we have about 20 questions. We've got 10 minutes, so it's a quick fire question round, which is not going to work. But we'll go through them one by one. The first, the most upvoted question in the Mentimeter is about portraying that image of the change you want to see. Like if you want people to feel that cycling is going to be safe, if the current environment's not ready for that, like if you currently have very hostile streets and all of your cyclists that use it now are those warriors, the road warriors, how believable is it if you portray that image of the relaxed Dutch cyclist pedaling around on a street? Like how far can you push it before it becomes non-believable, not believable anymore?
I think, well, it's a great question. And what's really important in that is to remember that what you're working on is a marketing strategy. So as I said, it doesn't always have to represent exactly what the conditions are. A lot of the work that we've done over the years has been in spite of some pretty hostile conditions in various cities that we've worked. And what you have to remember is you're hiring friends or models or whatever your budget is, and you're creating a streetscape that looks like you want it to look. It's really great if it's locally, of course, because that can get people to understand how their city could look if you start experiencing it on two wheels. But remember that you're staging this. And so it might not represent what it exactly looks like right now, but it shows people an aspirational option for what could be, even if it's not exactly like that.
So you can go quite far as long as you keep it in an environment that's relatable.
Yeah, I'm not saying go and use photos from the Dutch all the time. I don't think you're going to win many people over that way. No. It's a great way to show them where they could get eventually, but if you show them what it could look like in their own community, even if it's stretching the truth, that would be a great place to start.
Yeah, good answer. The second question is about political support. A lot of people say, okay, we don't have the political support yet. So while the general public might even be more progressive than the politics of it, because in a highly politicized environment, how do you talk to the politicians, or how do you get them on board using marketing tools? Is it the same process, or would you do something different?
I think the process with politicians is going to be different because they are going to want to know these quantitative results. But I think there's a step you can take outside of marketing, and that's to take them along to experience the environment. It gets outside of marketing and promotion, and I think what you can do is use your marketing in that respect to win over the public, to help them convince politicians it's what they want, and then as the project team, take your politicians that are a bit opposed out with you to understand the environment a little bit differently. So it gets outside of marketing and goes more into more of an engagement strategy at that point.
Right. So similar tools, different.
Yeah.
Right. So you would say don't go and try and calculate the cost-benefit ratio of this cycling project versus a road project that they're doing. Stay out of that, or go into the data as well?
You can. I think it depends on the politicians. I think there are some that are opposed you're not going to convince them by telling them that cost-benefit analysis, because then they're ahead, you're not right. Yeah. But I think if you have the public support, use that. It's great, and then also take them out to experience it. Yeah. So it's a little outside of marketing, but
another question from the Mentimeter: if you are working in this field as an advocate, for example, and you're doing all these things, you're portraying the change you want to see, how do you make sure you don't alienate existing cyclists, because they might feel that they're now left out because you're not portraying them in your imagery, and they say, well, that's not for me, but you kind of need them to come along, right? How do you balance that?
That is a great question. It's one I hear a lot, and it's maybe not the answer that you want to hear, but those people are probably on board no matter what. I'm hard-pressed to believe that a person that is a lycra-clad cyclist on a hybrid bike is going to stop cycling because of the bike lanes. They're going to keep doing it. The point is that you're marketing for the people that are not, and that's the messaging that we need to keep communicating. Say, it's great that you're doing what you're doing. We love that you've been on board. We love what you've done to get to this point. Now we're trying to go a little bit further. Yeah.
And then just say, if you're not with us, that's fine. But keep going. It's a hard sell.
It is.
Here's a really good one also from the Mentimeter. What's the best cycling campaign you've ever seen?
That I've ever seen?
Or the most across the globe. You've been around.
I've been around.
You've been to a few places.
So it's a great question. I'm always challenged with that because part of the reason I do what I do is because a lot of these campaigns don't necessarily exist. But there's been a couple that I've seen. There was one I think it was out of Hungary, but I apologize if I'm inaccurate, but it was called Buy by Bike. And it was literally just these nice photos of people from the community that went Christmas shopping by bike. And I love that because it brings this idea of these are things that we all do culturally, but we can still do it by bike. A little bit of shameless promotion, but we also did the same thing with our Christmas tree by bike, which was always a lot of fun. I don't know if it had the global, well, I mean, we got a lot of entries from around the globe, but that would be definitely one.
And was it so good because of the imagery they used, or because of the underlying message or assumption?
Kind of a little bit of both. Yeah, I'm trying to think of other campaigns that I've seen, and I'm really sorry.
Yeah, they're hard to find.
They're hard to find,
That's also a good message.
I will do some thinking. I know that some of our colleagues have sent me some, so we'll be sure to send them out to the mailing list after this with a few links for you to check out later.
Make sure you subscribe to the mailing list. Very good. Here, somebody asking for a quote. How much would it cost? Send us an email, and we'll give you a proper quote.
It really, I think it really
What are we talking?
depends on what you're trying to achieve. So if you're just talking about social media marketing, well, first you need to think about the photography. Maybe you have someone on staff that can help you create that, and you have a graphic design team. But if not, you're probably looking in the range for a good photo campaign. And I'm probably underselling it, but between $5,000 to $10,000 Canadian dollars or American dollars. I don't know what that equates to in euros. We'd just do the same.
At a zero.
Yeah. And then if you're doing film, if it's a sustained campaign, then that's going to cost more. But I mean, social media marketing itself is really economical.
Yeah.
Google ads are super economical as well. So it depends on the budget, but don't discredit what you can do.
Yeah, and if you're seeing the cities around the world, well, a lot of them are announcing huge cycling budgets, transitioning to the new green economy, then $5 or $50 or $100,000.
Yeah, it's a drop in the bucket.
Drop in the bucket.
Drop in the bucket for great return on investment. Yeah.
What if your city is actually not very nice to cycle in because it's really cold in winter? Are you still going to push that message of it's actually lovely?
Yes.
And you don't have to dress up?
Always. Okay, so Vancouver is not as cold as the rest of Canada. However, I have cycled in cold winter. Just think of the marketing needs to really express this idea that getting on a bike is no harder than walking. In fact, it'd probably stay a little bit warmer. So when I would cycle in winter conditions, it was nothing more than my mitts, winter coat, scarf, hat. If it's super cold, maybe a balaclava for those in Canada that understand what I just said. Face mask, if you will. But the idea is your marketing is showing that it doesn't matter who you are or how you get around in the world. It is possible to enjoy cycling.
Even if it's just in summer.
Even if it's just
Start
in
in
summer.
summer and then see how you go.
And so when we were in Australia, this was in Brisbane, it was the exact same conversation, but reversed. It gets so
Lovely
hot
weather
here,
there.
how can we cycle? There, the e-bike conversation comes into play because e-bikes really help to get sweat a little more out of the equation.
Yeah.
But it's never impossible to get on a bike. If your conditions are hostile, the point of the project you're working on is to make it safer, and the marketing is to support your project getting off the ground.
Yeah. Here's a question: is maybe a tricky one? Is a focus on infrastructure projects, is that compatible with emotional storytelling? Because you're talking about asphalt and concrete and solid hard things, but then this whole emotional story, does that match?
It can, in as much as the story that you're telling is about the person that's going to use it and not the bike lanes themselves. So when you're, say, for example, you're putting in infrastructure to make it easier for a mom and a child to cycle. And I just had this conversation with a colleague in Philly. The idea is that if one person uses that bike lane, it's a success. And if you tear it up as a result, then you failed. And so the idea is to make sure that you're really communicating that what you're building is going to benefit even just that mom and the kid to make it safer. And that mom is your story, not the bike lane itself.
Right. I have skipped a helmet question. There was a helmet question. I've been instructed to not ask the helmet questions. Here's a question about the current COVID-19 crisis. We have to touch on it. It is a lot of cities are now, rushing to get stuff implemented. A lot of people are considering it as an alternative to riding the bus or the train. So the group of interested but concerned has potentially exponentially grown.
Mm-hmm.
How do you work with that? Like, because the messaging is a little bit complicated, right? Because it's not a positive message. There is a pandemic out there, and we need to do something. You might be a little bit safer on a bike than on a train. So maybe try cycling. Is that how do you message? How would you message that?
Well, I think that what you want, it's definitely the idea is that we want to make sure that the trips that we're potentially losing on public transportation out of fear over proximity, that we transition those people onto a bike. And I think what you can do is show the temporary facilities in use, show what's possible, especially if you can show a diverse group of demographics using it. I think that's one of the key ways to move forward. I had another thought and it completely left me, but it's gone. I don't know where it went, but I think, again, this comes down to the idea that you're talking about the people that are benefiting.
Yeah.
So especially in communities where there's a lot of low income, where public transportation was how they got out, reaching out to that community and showing them that there is this alternative, and communicating that out to people that might be opposed to these temporary facilities, is that this provides an alternative for people.
Yeah, and then it can still be a positive message.
Exactly.
Just giving them something.
Exactly.
Right.
And
focus on that.
Yeah. And there's also, sorry, it's one thing I always forget to say, but we always forget that when it comes to cycling, we're not just talking about people that are driving age. Kids don't drive. They often take public transit as well.
Yeah.
And so if mom and dad don't necessarily or can't necessarily drive them anywhere, the bike lanes are also for them.
Yeah. That's good. Good for parents.
Yes.
Here's another question. If you have, if your mode share is really low, so like 0 to 1%, if you want to put something in, it might be seen as you're doing something for a very small group. And even if you get it right and you get a beautiful bike lane done, before you get the network finished and get some real momentum, it's going to take years, right?
Mm-hmm.
Before it really picks up. So maybe that first project is easier because it becomes, okay, if your first project is done, we're expecting these flocks of cyclists that you told us that would come, but of course they're not going to come with just one bike lane because it's not connected.
Yeah.
Like, how do you get that momentum? How do you keep that going if your mode share is actually very low? How do you keep selling that project as the cyclists will come? How long can you push that?
That's a great question.
That's a good question. Yeah, that's why I asked.
Yeah. I think so the trick there is that from a planner's perspective, you need to think about creating networks and not just one road. It is going to be harder to keep selling cycling if we're not thinking about the network as a whole. But I mean, as I was mentioning earlier, even if just one person is using that bike lane, it's a success. The hard thing with cycling is that when people see bike lanes in use, they always look empty because a bike takes up less space and moves in and out of a space much more nimbly than a car, and so it's less obvious. So it might be in those cases you start to bring a little bit of facts in and say, because of this project, we've seen this successful increase by this much. Even if it's from 0.1% to 0.5%, that's still an increase.
500% increase.
It is. See, that's the way you take the numbers. But just remember, I think hopefully your planning department is looking at a network in terms of that, and that's where you can push them as advocates or even from within the municipality.
And then it's probably easier to attach your marketing project or marketing stream to the whole program instead of just an individual.
Exactly.
Right? It's just we're doing a piece of the puzzle and you keep building.
Exactly.
I like this question. There's a lot of cars in popular culture and film and music videos. There's not that many bikes, and like it's a bit niche still. Is that a problem? And how do we fix that? If it's a problem.
I don't think it's necessary. I mean, I don't like seeing cars in a lot of movies either. I don't think it's necessarily as big of a problem as we might think, but there's a lot of crowdsourced material out there of like famous people on bikes that are gold for sharing. So if you can find those, share them out. I think we're starting to see a few things change here and there. I think most films shot in New York now have somebody riding around on a bike at least, Portland especially. So it's changing. It's going to take time, but I mean, cars are still...
The next James Bond on a bicycle?
That would be a pretty nice thing to see.
Game changer. can be intimidating to ride a bike for new users. So then maybe when they see the video, they're like, oh, that seems nice and easy, but the bike network doesn't quite deliver yet. Is that a problem? Do you think those people will just move away again, or can we reel them in?
I think if you have a sustained campaign that explains that this is where you're going to, and to stick around, don't leave the support yet. It's coming, and that actually could help push the project forward a little bit faster if it's getting stalled out, because people know what's possible. And that's where you can bring in things like you can incorporate with open streets days or big group bike rides to really start to build that public support.
And make sure that they feel part of something bigger.
Exactly.
Not by themselves. Do you have any thoughts of engaging with minorities? Any specific? Do you tailor your message to them? How do you reach them? There might be.
Get them at the table. They should be involved. If you want to make sure that you're reaching those communities, then have somebody who can speak for them at the table when you're making these plans from the beginning. Because you will miss something because we don't understand everyone else's experience. So if they're there at the table, that goes a long way to making sure you're helping to reach out to them.
Right. I had a question as well.
Curveballs from Leonard.
Curveballs from Leonard. Oh no, I think you covered most of them. Yeah, I think you covered all of them.
Oh, good.
We have a few more questions, but I think we're reaching about. Oh, we have 19 questions. Never mind. We're reaching the end of the webinar. So thank you very much. I think it was very insightful.
Thanks.
I hope it was useful for the people at home.
Yeah, me too.
We have another webinar coming up. Oh, we have a clicker. Oh no, he's gonna.
Yeah, we will need to advance.
There we go.
Yes, we have our next webinar will be in a couple weeks, featuring Shelley Bontia and Sophie Simon, who will be talking about the elements for creating child-friendly school zones. It's a little bit later than this one, so it'll be starting at 7 p.m. here in the Netherlands and relative time zones elsewhere. But stay tuned for that. The information just went out via our newsletter, so those who receive it should already have a link to sign up. If you didn't receive that but would like to, we can certainly do that if you sign up for our newsletter via our website, mobycon.com. We hope to see you then. And some shameless promotion because I was told to. As I mentioned at the top, I co-wrote a book called Building the Cycling City. It is currently the ebook of the month with our publisher Island Press for half price. I know we're almost at the end of May, but if you're interested in learning more about the Dutch story in terms of how they've achieved the cycling levels they've achieved here and the lessons that can be applied elsewhere, this is where you can find it. And finally, that's the end of our session. Thanks, Leonard, for helping me out with questions today. If I can leave you with one message, I said it before and I'll say it again, really think about your imagery from a standpoint of if you can't see it, you can't be it. Make sure you're reaching everyone that you're trying to get on board. If you have questions or any further comments from here, this is how you reach me, and we'll see you again next time.
Thanks everybody for joining. See you at the next webinar. Thank you.